So what we're going to do is we're going to chat a little bit about the journey of entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining from Northern California. And what I'm going to do is just to share a couple of sentences about your background, things that I have learned, highlights, and then we would like to cover a couple questions. And the most probably everybody's really eager to know. Seem to be change in the air in terms of the possibilities. And so we're looking forward to learning from you. Oliver Gould, he's a co-founder. And one of the things that I noticed about Oliver is that he's very involved with CNCF. CNCF is the Cloud Native Computer Foundation. It looked like it is almost every year you do a presentation on service mesh, like a deep dive, right? And you share that with with the community.
Yeah.
And then also the other thing that I noticed is that you have a heart for helping others, the young people who want to be part of the community as well. We had one of your employees present to the community already about service mesh, and so what we learned is that he joined the Google Summer of Code, and then through that, then went to CNCF, and then ultimately secured a full-time job. And so the participants here, I think, have a lot to learn from that as well. Ashar Rizqi, he identified with him because he's an electrical engineer and thinking about telecommunication, and also very familiar with that journey, coming from Pakistan to the United States. Many of us in Latin America tend to think about that journey as well in terms of going to coming here to the United States. And so I think we have a lot to learn, from that journey as well. Please start with sharing about, I know you have companies at different stages, right? What it's like, when we think about a startup. For me, startup is a temporary organization in search of a scalable and repeatable business model. Unlike a small business, both are good, but we want to think at that. And so please just take a few minutes to talk about your journey as an entrepreneur, what it means for you, especially in the context of cloud native. We start with you, Ashar.
Yeah, thank you, Raul. Thank you for the kind words and the a nice intro that is promising much more than I hope I can deliver. So let me just share very quickly my background, my journey, and my sort of association with the sort of Cloud Native Foundation and sort of just being part of that journey. So I'm originally from Pakistan. I was born there, but I grew up in the Middle East, in Dubai actually, and my family, just like a lot of immigrant families, are going to the places where they can find a lot of opportunity. And once I'd finished high school, I have an older brother who my what I really wanted to do was just do everything that he was doing. So he had graduated in electrical engineering, so I was like, that's what I want to do, even though I really didn't know whether that's what I wanted to do or not. The one thing that I was pretty certain of is that someday I'd love to be an entrepreneur, and because I felt that the entrepreneurship was really the ultimate expression of kind of freedom, especially coming from, developing world and just having control over your destiny. And so I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering from Texas A&M. This was around 2009, 2010, and the economy was just starting to recover. And for me, I was always of this mindset that, electrical engineers are superior to software engineers. And the software stuff, it's all this fuzzy code, but, real engineering is all about what you can touch and feel. And I was like, I want to go and work for Intel and, a semiconductor company, because that's what real. And, the universe obviously had different plans for me. As much as I tried, to get into that space, I just wasn't smart enough, or whatever the reason was. Like, I just couldn't get any of that. And the time was ticking for me in terms of getting a visa and finding a job. And I had my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife eventually, was like, hey, let's get married. And we had a long distance thing going on. So I was like, let me take the first job I can get. And it happened to be as a systems administrator, a systems analyst specializing in storage operations out of a data center for a financial services company. And I did that for a couple of years. And this entire time I was like, I really want to go back into the semiconductor space, because again, real engineering, real hardware engineering, so it was a very young, kind of inexperienced mindset. And then, I moved to Silicon Valley because I found an opportunity to kind of join this hyper growth startup called Box.com. And, and at the time, DevOps was really just in its beginning phases. The word DevOps was really starting to come in, and a lot of education was going on around it. Companies were really debating whether we should adopt these principles, these practices. At the time, Chef, Puppet were really kind of the big, orchestration and automation sort of companies at the time. They've kind of fizzled out a little bit over the last decade or so. So that stack attracted me to come and work on the infrastructure side for Box.com. And that's where I got to see a whole world of, what does it take to build a cloud-first, cloud-native company? And, why do we do that? And I was there for 4 years, and it was a pretty exciting journey. And I got to, experience, touch and feel every single part of the infrastructure. And it was a really interesting time because Box itself was transitioning from running data centers to moving to the cloud, which is a very exciting, but also can be a very, very painful and stressful journey. And there's a lot in there that there's a lot to unpack. And one other thing that I'll state in terms of a mindset that a lot of companies have is that, and what's changed quite drastically is that, hey, we are going to build everything in-house because we are the best engineers. We think we have the best engineers. So we're actually going to go and build, our own alerting system, our own observability system, because, that's what I like to do. And so anyways, was part of that journey, then joined another sort of pre-IPO fast-growing company called MuleSoft, which was later went public and then was acquired by, and had a very large presence in South America. So I had a chance to come visit, go to Argentina, Buenos Aires, and it was a pretty amazing experience for me. And that's where I was running platform engineering. And that's where the world was really shifting so quickly from, I just within a span of 5 years, I'd gone from running data centers to how do I run and manage my container workload and orchestrate across that. And there was just a whole new set of problems and challenges. And what inspired me to start Blameless was not necessarily the technical challenges, because the technical, as technology evolves, like those will always be there. But what gets left behind is really the people challenges. Like how do you make your developers more efficient and, give them, superpower so they can manage complexity. And that kind of became the seed of Blameless, because what ended up happening was a lot of the operations folks would get left behind and say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to write code and ship it. And then there's some guy with the title SRE or operations engineer was going to take care of these problems for me. And that wasn't really a world that I wanted any of us to live in. And so that became the genesis of Blameless. We got, applied to Y Combinator, got accepted, ended up not doing Y Combinator, but because we ended up raising a seed round and a Series A round later on from some tier 1 VCs, which was a very fortunate journey. But the one thing that I'll just say, and then I'll transfer over to Oliver, is my biggest learning there was really, at the time, it looks like it was a very smart thing to do. But I promise you one thing is that in that moment, I had no clue what I was doing and why we were able to raise money and why this was exciting. But the biggest learning for me there was to really step back and look at what are the high level market trends that are really going to drive or determine your success. Because quite frankly, 99, that's what people refer to as luck. It's really not luck, I would say. I mean, there's obviously an aspect of luck to it, but it's really having some kind of a sense of, okay, here's where we are today. Here's what the past has looked like, and my prediction and what I think the future is going to look like. So I'll give you a very simple example, which seems more obvious now than it did maybe 3 years ago, which is really around the complexity of running and managing and maintaining microservices. I mean, we all know, because we're part of the CNCF community, is that there's just now more sort of energy, excitement, ubiquitousness around the adoption of, containerized platforms and PaaSes and stuff like that. Even up until 3 years ago or 4 years ago, this wasn't the case. So it was, but a lot of companies that made that bet at that time are now benefiting from this really big wave that's pulling them from a lot of, you'll hear about this in a lot of observability companies and stuff like that. So anyways, I know there was a lot that I threw out there for folks, and I'm always happy to chat some more through. There's so much to unpack in that short period of time, but hopefully it gives you a sense of my journey and my experiences so far.
Thank you.
I need 1 second. I have some dogs barking.
Yeah, sometimes it's it's serendipity, right? I think I wanted to use that word. Sometimes we think we go in one direction, and all of a sudden, we are guided, directed in a different direction. Yeah. All of our colleagues going to share something.
Yeah, sorry about that. The timing.
Yeah.
So it's actually funny. I think my background is very different from Ashar's, but very parallel in some ways, I think, especially in the summary. So I'm from New Jersey originally. I'm the first one in my family to go to college. I went to a small engineering school in New Jersey called Stevens Institute. And I was really lucky there to get kind of early in my academic career some exposure to like Linux and Unix systems. And that really sparked an interest for me. Like I've always been kind of interested in like how things work, and really I got into computer science at all because I wanted to have a website with a counter, and to have a counter you had to have a web server somewhere held at state. And so I learned Perl to write a counter, and then like that really spawned this whole career from just trying to build websites for myself. And as I started learning Unix and Linux, I started working in the computer lab at the school. I worked for the system department at the school, and then later in my career there, as I was graduating, the person I was working with got a job at Yahoo out in Sunnyvale. And so about a year later, I followed him out to Sunnyvale and started working at Yahoo. And that was, Yahoo's been not a company at all anymore, but at the time it was like one of the 2 biggest internet services. And it was incredibly like to just have a front row seat to, or really a backstage seat to how the internet works and how messy it is and chaotic it is and slow moving, and it's just much less sophisticated than you think as a user of these services a lot of the time. And that was really at that job I met the people I was working with and the kind of surrounding cubicles. I was working with 5 years later at Twitter. Like a lot of the same people kind of move between companies, and it's a really small industry once you're actually here. And so that job was working in production operations. So what was like an ops or sysadmin team, and really working on like, the start of cloud services at Yahoo. Like how do you provision VMs yourself without having to go through hardware requisition processes? And then I went to Twitter in 2010. I was probably the second or third programmer hired on the ops team. Mm-hmm. And so where my full focus was going to be programming, and like Ashar said, we were building our own observability systems, and Twitter was building Mesos, which was kind of a predecessor to Kubernetes. But a lot of these core infrastructure technologies were developed at all of these companies. I mean, a lot of this comes from Google and Facebook too, where like Google, Facebook did it this way, and then all those engineers wanted to go do this at other companies. But that was really fortunate timing to be there, because I got to see Twitter go from a single Rails application to a big distributed microservice, and really see how the organization shifted. And so like when I started, I was on an ops team that had a single pager for the whole company. 2 years later, I was on call for my own services that I would work on during the day and get paged on at night. And so going through that transition and really being able to internalize the things that are difficult about it and are unpleasant about it, and what makes things work well and not is really what informed when we wanted to go start a company. And I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My dad was kind of an entrepreneur my whole life, and it seemed like a very stressful, busy life. So I was like, I want to work at a big, comfortable company where I can go play ping pong all day and it's fine. And my co-founder, William, was like, no, like, we've been in the middle of this, and like Docker's happening, Kubernetes is happening, all of these things are going to happen. And we should go apply our skills, not in the like back room of one of these consumer companies, but we should go provide value directly at what we're good at. And so that was really the start of Buoyant. And that happened late 2014, early 2015. That's when we actually started the company. And we really took the same open source technical things I was working on at Twitter, and used those things to build the first version of Linkerd, really to kind of bootstrap this idea of a service mesh. And it's again to solve these organizational problems of like, well, if you're at a company and you're trying to do microservices, you're going to have to solve all of these communications problems, and the communications piece is really what becomes the interesting part of a very high leverage piece of the system. And no one was working on it at the time, right? Everyone in the Mesos land was just focusing on getting containers up and running, and no one was talking about how to make them communicate well. And so that was, 5 or 6 years ago now. The anniversary is just coming up, and it's been a long, wild ride. But part of the keys to that were one, having been around it enough to really see how these things work, and being at companies that were on the forefront of a lot of these technical decisions, and realizing like these were inevitable. Like the whole industry is going to go this way, whether they like it or not, and it's just a matter of time. So we should start doing what we do well for the rest of the world. And since then, CNCF has been created, and now we have a home for lots of very cutting edge infrastructure technologies that are no longer stuck behind the like employment walls of all these companies. They're now developed in the open. There's training that's broadly available on the internet, and they're accessible to, I think, a whole next generation of engineers that are not going to have to be sitting in Sunnyvale to meet people and to learn these tools and get started with the stuff. So it's a really exciting time, I think, and especially with remote work, all of these things are kind of converging to create a much more decentralized internet ecosystem.
And the thing is that this can happen everywhere in the world. I mean, like the basic. I mean, I'm thinking that all basic needs. We need schools. We need food. So I mean, the active companies right now, the supermarkets, the food delivery systems, and so those are large distributed systems as well, right? I mean, everything starts small, but it can grow from there. So there's a huge opportunity everywhere because, when we compare the needs of anybody in North America or in South America, very similar, right? Transportation.
Yeah, we recently just found out that Linkerd, our open source project, is being used by some of the companies doing vaccine distribution. And HEB is one of our users who's done talks at Cloud Native Con about how they were rapidly accelerated their microservice adoption in the middle of the pandemic to do in-store deliveries and things like that. So yeah, it's being in this open source space connects you to all of these other opportunities and industries in a way that really wasn't possible 5 to 10 years ago. Just the ecosystem wasn't there.
I remember from one of our conversations, Oliver, it is that you mentioned something that caught my attention. You said, I had to know myself.
I think as part of the journey of starting a company, I'm sure Ashar was kind of saying this too. Like you start, you don't really know why people are interested in it or if it's a good idea, and you kind of have to like trust yourself and be willing to fail quickly and like accept that it's going to be hard. And I think that it's been the journey of starting a company is one that is a lot about learning who you are as a person and what you're good at, and also being able to identify that in other people, especially your co-founders, being able to really trust them and give them honest feedback and patience. Like it's the people things are the hard part, much more than the technical challenges.
Yeah. There is a question here from Don Clark. I think he says, I and few industry colleagues, telco entrepreneurs are trying to address the severe challenges for startups to engage with telcos. With telecom, I put a link to a group in the main chat. Do you guys share the view that telecom is a graveyard for startups? Ideas on what we can do about it? And then we have put a proposal for a code of practice for telcos to engage startups. We appreciate your feedback on your page.
Yeah, I definitely have some opinions on this. But Oliver, if you want to go first, please feel free.
My take is that any large organization is a graveyard for startups. I think as a startup, your lifeblood is people who can make quick decisions without lots of decision makers, and a telco is the kind of opposite of that. But same for utilities or most large banks. But I'd be curious what Ashar's opinion is.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as Oliver. I kind of look at the world. If you haven't read this book, it's called Crossing the Chasm, and it talks about technology adoption patterns and how you have the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority. And usually, the largest sort of companies out there fall into the late majority and, sort of the laggards, if you want to call them that, like very late in sort of coming up to speed. And it's a risk versus reward thing. They've been built to the point where it's more about governance and risk and control than it is about innovation. Now, of course, a lot of this is changing, by the way. And generally, if you take a very sort of very an open-ended approach to engaging with telcos, then I 100% agree that, you will probably, it does become a graveyard very quickly, because just to navigate decision-making, understanding that decision-making in itself can take, many, many months, if not potentially years. And that is just very precious time that you have as a startup, and you're burning through your capital. And then there's only one thing that can kill an early stage company, and that's running out of money, right? But I'll caveat this by saying that given that there's a lot of because of COVID, there's so much market pressure for a lot of these large companies to now perform like startups, right? And you'll see a lot of shakeup and change happening in a lot of these companies. And it really comes down to, can I find that one small team of, let's say, 5 to 10 engineers that is kind of really moving away from the rest of the pack and just moving very quickly and adopting cloud technologies, adopting new practices, new cultural patterns and stuff like that. And you're not going to get that just by Googling and sort of just doing some random LinkedIn searches. You have to have the connections in those companies to identify very specifically what is that one team. That's a small sliver of hope that I have for a lot of these large companies, and something that we've seen where they've engaged with very, very early stage companies is it's the ones that are just like a small 5 to 10 person team that is kind of empowered to make its own decisions and move quickly, right? I'll just say one more thing, which is generally the other thing that I'll say is, I would recommend or encourage everyone to think about whether working with telcos. I understand that in a lot of developing, countries, the telcos are the ones where a lot of technology seems to be concentrated. But imagine for a second that, feels like a solved problem, right? What is the Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 going to look like when everybody has a cell phone that's performing at 4G, 5G levels, and, your basic needs need to be fulfilled? And I would recommend folks to kind of look beyond that. And assume for a second that the infrastructure to, for your cloud and app ecosystem has kind of been put in place. The network infrastructure is in place. What does the future look like? And that's where I think the opportunities become really, really exciting. It's a pattern I've seen in a lot of developing countries. I myself am from Pakistan, so I've worked with early stage companies in Pakistan, and I see this pattern where they're like, hey, the telcos have money and we want to go to them and we want to get them excited about what we're building. We want to solve problems for them and all that kind of stuff. And again, what ends up happening is, it really comes down to like, who do you know at those places that can help you? It becomes a kind of an unfair game at some point, right? So, but again, I think the opportunities are beyond, like, if you just take telco out of the picture and think beyond, I think that's where a lot of exciting and interesting opportunities come up, for folks to think about. Really my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, like I what I'm most excited about is I think our users are going to be the people who are our customers and our open source users are going to be the one that disrupt the telcos. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not going after the market incumbents. We're going after everyone who's trying to eat their market, right? And I think if we can be a part of that transformation, that's great for our company, and it's also great for the industry, because that's kind of how things should work, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that insight. From my perspective, we've seen this happen in the last 4 or 5 years, right? I think 4 or 5 years ago, we still had, a lot of startups were trying to reach out to telcos, but it's, when there is other opportunities in the enterprise, then that's, it's difficult to justify. Now, thinking about the other question that I wanted to address, and so a lot of folks in here would be maybe interested in this question as well, is knowing what you not know, and you're very much involved in different parts of the world. In the past, the idea was that things happen in Silicon Valley, right? And both of your companies are, were born in Silicon Valley. So, but now, since everything changed, especially now after COVID, what are the possibilities for these companies to be born in Latin America, in Central America, in El Salvador, for example?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Raul. And I think you're spot on in terms of, like, because of COVID. So this is a 2-part answer, right? Because it's a little bit more nuanced. The reality is that, look, at the end of the day, a lot of the talent, and when I say money, I don't mean like just any capital. I mean just like smart capital that has, decades worth of experience investing in building technology company happens to be concentrated very much in Silicon Valley. So that is a reality that I think it is now starting to slowly diffuse out into other areas, and it'll be probably 3 to 5, maybe a longer time frame before we start to see more of these hubs. And when I say hub, it's not just like where's the talent, but the talent, the money, the connections, the customers all coming together, those kinds of hubs. Austin, just in the United States, Austin is a place. You've got New York, obviously, LA, now Utah. A lot of these places are starting to pick up. And outside of the US, there's also a lot of examples just in North America. Mexico, I've been hearing a lot of great things about Mexico, and a lot of sort of these technology sort of hubs and investment hubs starting to pop up. Canada is another place. And so it is going to take time. And, it's really, you have to figure out how you want to time yourself in such a way that you can take advantage of. But there is a certain acceleration that you do get by having a presence in Silicon Valley, if, maybe it's just your sort of non-R&D kind of function that's there. At the same time, what I'll say is what I've found over the last, 5 to 7 years is that because of communities like CNCF and just general open source community, which is incredible, just the shift that's happened in terms of knowledge and mind share kind of diffusion that has gone out to the rest of the world is actually pretty amazing, right? Where I'd say 7 to 10 years ago, it used to be, companies had this decision to make, hey, there was this conception, which now is definitely a misconception, that, Silicon Valley engineering talent is much higher quality or North American engineering talent is much higher quality. I think that has been a very, very drastic shift and a drastic change. And, I think a lot of the talent that's coming in Central America, South America, and other parts of the world, because look, at the end of the day, those economies and what's driving those are just booming economies that are accelerating at faster paces than they ever have before. And that creates a lot of opportunity and challenges for the businesses that are out there, especially B2B enterprise type opportunities, and of course, consumer. And that's kind of like this rising tides lift all boats. And I think, you know, for those folks, you know, the key thing for me is that the talent, the technical engineering talent has really come up to par, where it's becoming, you know, it's kind of reached this tipping point where you can say, you know what, I can get a similar, you know, you know, quality in terms of engineering talent, which I couldn't get before outside, where I don't have to be paying people top dollar because they happen to have the what I like to call the pedigree more than anything, right? It's like, oh, they've worked at these big name companies, but it really comes down to, can they deliver and execute and solve the same kind of problems that I am? And I think that's the biggest shift that's happened. And I think I think my advice to a lot of entrepreneurs that are in, you know, Central America or South America, you know, is to be mindful of that and take advantage of that, and really like have faith and have faith in yourselves that, hey, like we are performing, or have achieved the same levels as kind of, you know, for looking from the outside, you're like, oh wow, there's this, like, you kind of get starstruck by Silicon Valley. But what I'm challenging that to say, like, that's no longer true anymore. And, you know, you should really believe that, and you'll see a lot, you know, and it'll create a domino effect of money that flows out into a lot of these countries.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about Silicon Valley, at least in my experience, has been that investors will talk to us and say, you're going to give your software away for free and still give us money. Like, most investors in the world don't think about software that way, where they're kind of thinking about the network effects around open source. And so I think there's a lot of like smart money in the Valley area that can spot these patterns and trends in a way that they're more willing to put, you know, seed checks down, sizable seed checks down for kind of open source or infrastructure technology. But on the other hand, you know, if you build a successful open source project or a really usable software as a service website, you'll be able to get Silicon Valley money if it's used and useful and targets, right? So I think we're seeing investors become smarter about this stuff. I think CNCF especially, like, and now my father-in-law asked me about Kubernetes because he's heard about it. And it's like, I think the tides are shifting there, but the access to capital is very unique in the Bay Area, I think.
Yeah, the word is out. And so therefore, this is a great connection. I mean, in terms of CNCF, what about the community in terms of, you know, Ashar, how have you connected with, you know, CNCF, and what would you tell the, you know, the folks here how to go about it?
So I have a long history with CNCF. Relatively long, I would say about 5 to 6 years. In like the earliest, I think it was CNCF year 2 or something like that, where they I forgot the name of the summit that we had. This was in Seattle. So I've been you know, CNCF is, I think, is a pretty incredible community when it comes to launching, thinking about, you know, giving away for free, validating your product idea, startup that you're trying to build, especially in the, you know, that's taking advantage of this big wave of transformation that's happening around infrastructure and managing infrastructure, cloud native infrastructure, right? My recommendation for any company that is in that space is that you have to be involved. You must be involved in CFCF, because it's like, that's where all of the activity is happening. That's where a lot of the, you know, it's kind of become this brain trust in the world, which is, it's pretty amazing, like what this community has been able to do and what's actually, quite frankly, come out of this community, and how it's brought people together and the kind of shifts that it's making in the world. So 100% that if you're thinking about something in this space, or even, quite frankly, adjacent to this space, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be, something to do with, you know, when we think CNCF, we mostly think microservices, containers, Kubernetes, you know, but think about the network effect of the things that are happening once you do have a sort of cloud native platform. It's like, okay, what does the developer ecosystem look like? You know, how does it change the way we do product development? What are the product managers going to need? What are the kind of tools that really plug into what's coming out of CNCF? And so on and so forth. How can we make people better, you know, sellers of software, you know, and stuff like that? So it's just, you know, there's a lot of adjacencies that I think it sort of creates, and you know, I think people should think about.
Yeah. Also, we were both, you know, blessed by having good networks from working at companies where we're meeting folks, and CNCF is that network now that kind of spans beyond, an employment boundary. And so I've now become great friends with folks at, all of the major cloud providers and other startups. And that's all through going to the conferences and going to these events and kind of seeing people year after year. And so those relationships, those individual relationships can really be a really important part of starting your business and getting the right feedback or the right co-founders. It can make a huge difference on whether you're successful or get off the ground or not.
Yep, spot on.
Victor has a question, but I think you kind of have addressed that. He says, cloud computing has had a great impact on every industry in general. What are the benefits and advantages that startups can take from the cloud technologies to accelerate?
It's a lot cheaper to get started. I mean, most startups can get free credits on the cloud providers. You get a whole bunch of tools that you can just take off buying software. Like, we're customers of countless other startups who just provide kind of tiny little functions that we would have to hire for, or, so I think that ecosystem just pays dividends and lets you lean on common things that are being solved by everyone instead of by individual companies.
Yeah, I think Oliver put it really well. I can't even really add much to it. I mean, I can't even think of, I would really be surprised if there are companies that are like, hey, we're going to go and start by renting out data center space, and that's how we're going to go to market with our product. That would just be like very surprising to hear in today's day and age. And quite frankly, what's happening is that, the average time for a new company to launch with a product in a sort of an up and coming space has really shrunk down from, it used to take 5 years, 3 to 5 years to now 12 months on average, where you can, a couple of folks over the weekend go and get some cloud credits, incorporate a company, put a sort of POC out there, use all sorts of SaaS and PaaS and IaaS technology, bring it all together, and boom, now you have a product that you can put in front of users. You could do that in realistically somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks, like if you wanted to really do it, right? That's what a lot of companies a lot of these accelerators kind of make you, when you're part of that, that's kind of the motion that they really drive you to, is that within 3 months you're sort of doubling your user growth and stuff like that, and all of that comes from just leveraging cloud technology sort of native. So
this question is from Raymond Escobar. Is there a way to connect with those startups before they become 1 billion US? I think it's a research, right, in terms of Crunchbase.
I think I think what you're asking is what are the leading indicators that kind of demonstrate or show startups that are, more likely to succeed, because obviously success is not guaranteed, but more likely to succeed and get to a good outcome. And I would say, there's a few ways to look at it. Look at, the most important thing is the founding team. Is what does the team look like? And if I'm an investor, if I'm looking for a co-founder, whatever it is, I look at who is the founding team. That's one. Again, understanding the problem space is pretty important, but that's pretty abstract at this point. But you look at where are the tier one investors putting their money consistently and in what industries and stuff like that. And then you go to LinkedIn and look at, how many people they've hired, how many job posts. There's a bunch of different sort of things that you can look at that can kind of give you a sense of hey, where is a company headed? And of course, there's just the brand awareness, right? You hear constantly, a name Buoyant and Linkerd, you guys have done a pretty incredible job, because, a lot of, I would be surprised if folks don't know about, you're just tied to service mesh and service mesh technology, and, Linkerd being open source and stuff like that. It's just this constant drumbeat that you hear about. So it's never one thing. It's always a multitude of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit of a broken record today, but the network is so important, right? The way I meet new startup founders who are trying to like get their products off the ground is through their coworkers who they worked with before, who I know, or their previous founders at the last startup they were at. Like the network of folks who are trying to build things is so important, and it really. I mean, one of the great things about Silicon Valley for all its problems is that it's a really encouraging environment. It's not generally a cut for sharp elbows kind of space. It's really companies trying to help each other be successful and figure out where there's common places that where we can leverage and build together. And so, CNCF being one community, the open source community is one way to build those connections. And then the other is like talking to founders at companies and like asking them what they're doing. Like there's that sharing of, it's really kind of like a demo day culture where everyone wants to show what they're building and get feedback and like see what someone else is building and think about it with them. And that is really, I think, the best part of Silicon Valley. And I'm glad that we see those good things kind of extend into open source communities in a more formal way than they were previously.
Yeah, I mean that's if I'm hearing correctly, one way. There are many ways, but one way would be to connect to community, and therefore, here's an opportunity to connect to CNCF that it has 103,000 contributors, and it has over 800 company members, the largest companies in the world, and over 200 startups. And so start looking at those startups as well. Go to the CNCF website and start studying those companies. Another way is, connected, to LinkedIn. We have started a group for Kubernetes Community de El Salvador. Join there. One of the questions is, what are the best ways to convince investors to support startups in Central America?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have an easy answer, but I think the ultimate answer is to, build something valuable and being confident. Building good demos is a great way to get interest. And I think Ashar said this before, but most investors invest in teams more than specific product ideas, because the product's going to change 100 times before it gets open to the public. But they're going to select on the people that they think can execute well. So, when we raised our seed round, like investors had done all this reference checking that like they found people who sat next to me 2 jobs ago and like asked if I was, a diligent worker. So it can be, again, it's a lot about relationships and kind of having the right references and, good product sense kind of always wins.
One small note here, it is that in the past, right, this is just from personal experience. In the past, investors, went to Central America to find investors as well. Because people in Central America, there are a lot of business owners that have these businesses for a very long time, right? Families, for long periods of time. And so they need to invest their money. So they invest in their money through, private equity or VCs, in Silicon Valley. So these people are very mobile. They're everywhere, right? So, but the thing is that if they come up with an idea in Central America that makes sense, they will invest on it.
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
They're both really good points, Oliver and Raul. One thing that I'll say is the most important. So there's a couple of things. One is investors are not going to invest in something that's big today. I mean, there will be investors that will do it. They're going to invest in something that is going to be big, right? And so that is the story that you as an entrepreneur have to, that's your job as an entrepreneur to tell that story over and over again. But more importantly, I think the core of that is, don't follow ideas, but follow problems. That's the most important thing. That's the biggest distinction that I would recommend making, is that, ideas and solutions and, you're going to have so many of them. But the thing that really needs to be the central focus of, of why somebody's going to put money into something is your ability to communicate why a particular problem is the way it is today, and how it's going to be in the future, and how it's evolving and getting potentially worse, and how your platform or your system is the thing that comes in and solves that problem, regardless of what sort of domain that you're in, right? And so that's the story arc that you as an entrepreneur need to tell. And whether that's Central America or any other sort of part of the world, I think that's, if you follow that pattern, there will be a lot of money that's out there that you can get very, it's not very difficult to get that money.
Yeah, there are companies, for example, one in Central America is called Hugo, is spelled Hugo, but it's has traction, in Central America. You got Rappi, who has raised $1 billion in investment as well, right? And it's making significant progress. So all these companies start happening, in Latin America, in Central America. So now for those folks that perhaps are in school right now, in college, the community started with a good number of them, by joining the group. And so in part, it is, I would say, the challenge is to believe that how can I find, if I am in business, right? Or I'm studying computer science, but how can I, I'm not programming, right? What other things can I do for the community? And so I think that putting out together an event like this will be one, right? Or documenting, a program, or translating, right? Or sometimes, connecting, just reaching out, asking questions. I think, what is your take on all of this, based on your, involvement with this young person?
So on our side, I think the people think to get involved in an open source project that you have to be a kind of senior developer contributor, and that's really not the case. Where we need the most help is a lot of times just helping people, right? So we have a Slack room and GitHub issues, and a lot of what would I do with my day if I let it happen is like I'll just be asking questions and trying to help people debug their problems with them. And that is both the way I learn a lot about how different people's systems work in different parts of Kubernetes that I haven't seen before, but also it is a real contribution to the project, because they're, it's again, that helping, our job is to help people be successful. And when people help us help other people be successful, that's even better. And so that is, documentation is a big help there. Just being involved in debugging and reproducing issues can be a really good way to learn and, ask questions at the same time. Also, blog posts and tech meetup talks have been great. I know Sergio, who's in the audience today, has done a bunch, both of those, where he's done talks at KubeCons about things he's learned, and just sharing that knowledge. One, raises your visibility, and more people know who you are and know what your skills are. And it's also a great way to learn things. It's kind of, conference-driven development or conference-driven learning is maybe not the ideal way to do it, but is certainly a forcing function that gets you there.
Any comments, Ashar?
No, I think Oliver stated it pretty well. I think he's definitely the expert on this.
What do we have to do to get you to come back at Kubernetes Community Day El Salvador, when if we manage to have a physical presence, right?
Do you have vaccine? I'll go for vaccine.
Yeah.
So that's the next question. Well, when we first started, thinking about this, we saw the possibility of doing it face to face, but then quickly, turned into virtual. But we look forward to the next, the next step in all this, and get you to come back.
Yeah, I would also suggest, just in case there are especially students out there, Google Summer of Code and the Linux Foundation, LXF community, or what used to be called Community Bridge, are great ways to get involved and be signed up with a mentor and get paid. So I was lucky to do Summer Code when I was a student, and it was really difficult, but a learning exercise.
Yeah.
And we've done that a few times, and it's a great way to kind of get hooked into a community. But it always kind of starts by finding projects that have interesting things that you're excited about and spending lots of time on it. Like way too much time is the only way you learn anything in the space of my experience.
How are the two programs different, the Linux Foundation and Summer of Code?
I think it's basically who pays. So Summer of Code, Google pays, and it's not just CNCF. It's like any open source project, Apache Foundation, many apply there. So if you want to do React development, you can usually do, I'm sure there's some React Summer of Code projects and things like that. LXF, as far as I understand, is much more focused on the Linux Foundation and CNCF. And so they're parallel intern projects there.
How big are those programs?
Google Summer of Code is massive. It's been 10 or 15 years they've been at it, and I don't know how much money they spend every summer, but it's quite a bit. And LXF is probably a bit smaller. I think, in the Linkerd project's quite small as far as number of maintainers. So we'll do between 1 and 3 interns in a summer, but a project like Kubernetes might do, 10. So it depends on the size of the project and what's going on that summer for the company.
One thing, Rahul, that I wanted to share, it's something that we've done in Pakistan before, which is really partner with a forward-thinking, sort of government that, is able to set aside some budget for driving innovation within the government itself. So, they'll sponsor these fellowship programs, hire a bunch of students, pay them a stipend, and then they'll give them a bunch of it's a great opportunity to bring open source projects into the government. And I think I've seen that program work really, really well. And then it becomes exciting because then you can expand beyond that very quickly into sort of more adjacent domains beyond that. But if there's a way, or there's a program, or some kind of like an accelerator, incubator, fellowship type thing, it can be maybe at the local government level. There's this Code for movement that was started here called, it was Code for America, Code Africa, and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend folks to look into that as a way to, I think there might be one for Guatemala as well. There's definitely one for Mexico. That's a really great way to kind of engage and, take on some of these projects, and again, bring in a lot of open source, into these environments, which is very cool. When you hear about the end results, which is like, oh, this government transformed the way in which, people get their driver's license, and it's all powered by, Kubernetes, Linkerd, and it's just like, oh, wow, like we're really changing people's lives. So.
Yeah. And the other thing that folks here need also want to know is that both of you have hired and have people working in Latin America, right? So the secret's out, right? You go where talent is. So if talent is ready in Latin America, it's, everybody wants it. So it's a huge opportunity. After this panel, we're going to have our next panel is going to be one where folk that are contributors and that are from Latin America, some from Costa Rica, Salvador, Mexico, Colombia, and so on, even Spain, and how their journey in terms of connecting with the open source community. So I hope you can join, stick around if you can, and I want to say thank you. I don't know if the audience has additional questions. If we have covered everything, let me make sure that yeah. So Niraj and Rahul says, great session. Hope everyone got something out of it. Thanks, Raul, for inviting me to participate. And Don Park says, good point, Victor. Let me see. Victor says, I think open source is very aggressive idea for telcos, given they came from standards mindset. So this is a community that debates this issue in terms of open source and the standards. But thank you for joining the panel, and
thanks for hosting us, Raul.
Yeah, thank you, Raul, and thank you everyone for attending.
Looking forward to stay in touch.
For sure.
Take care.
Bye.
Good luck.
Take care. Bye-bye.